Thank you for listening to Chart Your FI. I'm your host, Christopher Elder. And on Chart Your FI, we talk about financial independence and how it is a means to an end to achieving your goals and finding your purpose in life. Stand by for the sounds of freedom. Hey, I wanted to plug you guys on a new podcast that's coming out. It's called Return to Roots. It's retention, transition, and reintegration from military to veterans in the community. It's a resource podcast that's meant to provide actionable content to help military, active duty, and veterans transition, reintegrate, and also do well in their military career. It's important to have a plan for your transition and never too early to start. One thing that I always hear from everybody that's transitioned out: start now. I hope you enjoy. Take care. We get the chance to talk with Joe Platz. He is a real estate professional who has been in the real estate business for over 19 years, and he is running the Platz team up in Snohomish, Washington. I hope you guys enjoy the show.
Right on, Chris. Well, my name's Joe Platz. I get to lead a group of people that we call the Platz Group, and we do that in the real estate space. And so been a real estate professional for 19 going on 20 years this year. And at the end of it, I would summarize it as I'm blessed to be somebody that helps people grow with their wealth through real estate, whether they are looking to buy, sell, or invest. So we're thrilled that we get to help people with such an important part of their life.
So when you were starting out, like, what made you choose real estate? Like, so 19 years ago, so that's like 2003 ish,
Yeah.
mid 2003. You're like, here's Joe. And what were you doing at that time? Like, what got you into the real estate game?
Yeah, so I call it a happy accident, and basically what happened is as a junior in college, I was on an entirely different path. I was studying accounting and information systems, and kind of had my eyes on a corporate career that never came to fruition. And I had a friend that I'd grown up with, and his father had owned some real estate businesses, and he was following in that path, and he had kind of this business model that he was working on, where he needed people that had a real estate license to assist with some relocation clients. And so it was pitched to me as to what we call in modern language a side hustle. So after some coercing, I got a real estate license to help the buddy with this thing he was trying to do. And honestly, I didn't take it seriously at all. I didn't think it was ever going to be a significant part of my life, but the joke's on me.
I like how you're like, yeah, the joke's on me and part-time. It's so funny how, and as you went on, you're like, man, this is like, I like this.
Yeah.
Right? It's funny how you accidentally sometimes stumble into your passion, and some people would ignore that, and they would be like,
Yeah.
oh no, I need to do the corporate job. I need to fit into the box. And
Yeah, people struggle with safety and security, and it makes a ton of sense because jumping off the bridge or pushing off the dock, whatever ism you identify with the most, like it's kind of a big deal to go out and do something a little different, to do something different than what whoever they are, the they sayers and that kind of thing. And so sometimes you're fighting the voices even inside your own family as to what you're doing if you follow something that you discover as a passion.
yeah, and it's funny because, like, for example, this podcasting thing, yeah, I'm not getting paid anything, but
it's like the little things like this that fill you up every single day, or every time that you do it, you're like, oh wow, this is like really cool. I like doing this. And when you can find something like that and get paid, that's not a bad gig. I'm trying to get to your level where I actually get paid.
Well, yeah. Well, I think the secret to it, and that's where you're coming from, Chris, is, what I discovered about real estate that was different than technology, and I hated accounting. So even though I got a degree in that, that was like, yeah, no, thank you. But yeah, you were helping people and you were providing something of value and stuff in the technology space, but getting into more of a service-based business, you got to see like the actual effect of the people. And you just started to learn some, I'd call them maybe for today, like rules of the universe. And so one of those rules that I've just learned to be true is, when you take care of people first, then you're always taken care of. And so chances are this will turn into something for you at some point, because you're focusing on people first.
Yeah, and it's you know, there's this type of leadership style that I've really kind of identified my leadership style, and that's called a servant leader. And not necessarily going around mopping up behind everybody and stuff like that, which I honestly don't have a problem cleaning up someone else's mess, but finding and looking at somebody and identifying how do they need to be led. Do they need to be led with compassion, with empathy, or do they need somebody that's going to be right there on top of them until they can, go off on their own? And it's, for example, like I've had to be a servant leader as, hey, you no longer like should be working here, so I'm going
Right.
to serve you
Yeah.
by getting you onto your next path. And yeah, they may not like you at that point in time, but you are serving them in the long run. It's not with it could be like, hey, I look at it like as a leader in the Navy, like, hey, I'm not looking at what necessarily the Navy wants all the time. Yeah, we have the mission, we're going to get the mission done, but I'm also looking at that individual and saying, hey, well, I know that if I make sure that you're good here, you're gonna end up being really good over here and helping out the mission once you get your stuff in line.
Right.
And that's what a servant leader is all about. And I also agree, helping your people grow. You elevate your people, that and elevates you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like another phrase that's really common in the business world that I was thought of while you were talking is, and it actually comes from the sports world. Some pretty famous athletes, but separations in the preparation, right? And so what you just said is, by pouring into that person, helping them get in that place to where when the time comes that they need to perform at a certain level, like you've helped equip them to do that, and then you're mutually successful. And so yeah, it's good, it's rewarding, it's fulfilling to be able to know that you've had a positive impact on somebody and their success.
So as a business leader, because you went from learning how to do it and then eventually becoming your own business leader, where was that point where you started teetering from being
Yeah.
lackey to not necessarily a lackey, but the person who's going to go out there and do the extra hard work, because that's what it takes to become
Yeah.
become good at your craft. You have to do all those extra little things
Right.
to become good at your
Right.
craft.
Right. Again, some language that you hear sometimes is you hear people say, well, I'm a really good number two. And, I find that interesting, because when I apply that to my story, I absolutely started my career accidentally as a number two. And I got really comfortable as being a number two, and I was really good at being a number two. And, they say that necessity is, or yeah, oh shoot, I'm messing up the phrase, but necessity is the mother of invention. There we go. And good thing we're all polished here, right? And so, what happened is I was in the real estate space, and this really cool time called 2008 happened. And I just woke up in 2008 as somebody that had pushed off the dock, went after some found passions and dreams, right? Like, you got the dates, like 2003, like, I'm 5 years in, I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. The housing world is a complete disaster. And some of the number ones were having a hard time. And so I was a number two, and I just kind of, decided that there were two paths. Path one was to quit. Path two was figure it out. And I just resolved that I was going to figure it out until something forced me to quit.
And it's funny, 2008 was a dumpster fire for a lot of people.
Right.
And it's funny because in 2020, 2021, another dumpster fire. These dumpster fires are going to happen. So when times are good, you need to start, you need to start mentally preparing yourself for, hey, when the good times are good, get it. Make sure that you still a little bit of that, cash, energy, perseverance, whatever it is, because you're going to need it. You're going to need to tap on it later on. And it's funny because, going back to focusing on your people, you need to tell your people, hey, you need to enjoy the time that you have because it's very limited and it's a finite item. And if you don't take that vacation, or if you don't take that time for yourself, I've seen people, for example, I'm just going to, say, hey, like, hey, some companies, they influence people to come work for them because they erroneously will be like, hey, everybody's taking a week off. Business is going great, but we're going to shut it down for a week, make everybody take some time off to spend time with their family, because they understand that time with their family is actually going to make them a better worker when they come. Things like that. I'm not saying necessarily, everybody should give their people time off, but what really gets people ticking is how can I get paid more? How can I get more time off?
Right. Yeah. Kind of, not to regress too much of the conversation, but, something you were talking about earlier, there's some resentment in our world towards, what again, the business world calls basically bottom line management. And so, there's kind of two identifiable strategies that are really prevalent. And one of them is, money before people, and the other one is people before money. And so, if you're a people before money postured person, then you start looking at the health of your people. And the health of your people is, you can have a star performer that they might be so excited, so ambitious that they might be willing and wanting to work, say, 7 days a week. And as a leader, like, I got to be in the position where I can have that star performer. They could be killing it for themselves, it could be killing it for our business, but I got to jump in if they're doing 7 days a week, and I got to say, say it's you, Chris. I got to say, hey, Chris, like, I love the passion, I love the hunt, I love the zeal, I love everything you're doing, but you're gonna burn yourself out. And so, yeah, seasons change. They're what's interesting is, it's this whole common sense thing that now we get to joke isn't common anymore. Like, we have all these isms that are true. Like I said, they're laws of the universe. You're either going into a storm or you're coming out of one. So when things are great, the storm's on the horizon. If you're in a storm now because of COVID and the pandemic affecting your business, well, we know that sunshine's on the horizon. So let's make preparations for the market we're going into, depending on what your business is versus what you're coming out of. Being, forward focused versus reactive is a huge advantage to your strategies.
And you just mentioned, something that reminded me of, what's that saying? You're forming, you're storming, and then you're norming.
Yeah.
So, yep. Forming, storming, norming, and it's a cycle. You're always going back into it, and you gotta remember, whenever you added somebody new into your mix, you're gonna be, you're in the forming phase again, and then you're storming. And if you never get out of that storming, it's because you didn't form correctly. and you can't get to the norming if you never did the storming. So
Yeah.
it's an evolution, and a lot of people don't take the time to realize, hey, when I when I take time off, we're going to go back into the storming phase, and prepare for that, and mentally prepare for the storm, because it's going to happen. It's not if it's going to happen, it's when.
Right.
So yeah, man, the focus on people, like that's money right there. And you were talking about some people will focus on the money, some people focus on the people. And I argue that if you invest your time and efforts into your people are going to make you wealthier than you will ever be, and not just necessarily monetarily. you know um there's studies out there that show that people that are in a job where the environment is a family oriented type of job, people tend to stay on. They have loyalty, they have all that. They're like, hey, yeah, I could go work at the job, the cutthroat job over here making almost double, but these guys actually treat me like I'm a part of part of the team. And obviously they're not working for a Scrooge McDuck that's just taking all the money and not giving it out, because that's not good leadership either. That's not taking care of people.
There's actually studies, Chris, that there's companies that have not dictated how many vacation hours or PTO hours or some of those kinds of things that their team members have, and they've gone to a laissez-faire system where it's like, hey, if you need to take time, versus the companies that say, well, you get a week or you get 3 days or whatever it is. And what they've been able to statistically prove in the research is that the companies that go open-handed and say, you know what, we care about the health of you, so if you need time, take time, that the number of days worked by that staff member is higher than the ones where they say this is what you get. And so it's interesting, the loyalty that you can create in somebody by treating them well is that they're actually motivated to do better, work harder, and do more than by trying to control them by saying, here's the edges to your box.
Yeah. And and then when the time gets tough, not throwing the towel right away, because you mentioned 2008, you had two options.
Mm-hmm.
One was throwing the towel, and the other one was
figure it out,
right?
Yeah.
And I feel like when you say common sense isn't common anymore, a lot of people just kind of throw up their hands. And look at our job market. We're saturated with so many jobs right now that people aren't taking. And then they're pleading that they don't have enough money. I'm like, well, there's jobs out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really strange because I'm hiring and everybody else in the universe I know is hiring, and yet you still run into people that say that they're having a hard time with employment. Yeah, it's there's some kind of a cultural shift or something that's happened in the pandemic, and I'm not going to even pretend to have that figured out, but there's some kind of a disconnect right now. And I think a lot of it is just some negativity that's just come to head with, like I said, I think the way that people have been treated. And so, I think our world is trying to figure that out a little bit. And hopefully we see, more realignment towards, that focus. I mean, there's interesting people like Henry Ford that, he built a great company, but he also built an entire, housing program and all these things so that his people had literally everything they needed. And you look at some of those things from the past and it's like they're unimaginable in today's context, but it might be that we need to focus on people a lot more in order to accomplish our dreams and goals, because if you're successful and me helping you be successful creates my success, then it's a win-win. And those are things that are inspiring and make you want to get out of bed versus things that make you want to pull the covers over your head and say, not today. So and if you haven't had a job where you didn't pull your covers up and say not today, then you probably never showed up to work, right? So
yeah, sometimes whenever I'm looking, and I think that projecting is a super important thing. Like, hey, I'm going to be, if you want to be like the senior executive, well, then you need to start acting like that senior executive. What does the senior executive do? Well, he comes in a half hour early and he reads these reports and he's knowledgeable on this spectrum of items. Well, then you probably should start working towards that, even though you may not be getting paid, but people are like, well, I don't get paid for that. I'm like, and that's why you'll never get paid for that. And
Yeah, that's an entitlement culture, right? That's another symptom that we have in our culture, I would say, where people want to, they want to skip ahead, and I made this mistake too. They want to skip ahead. They want the shortcut. They want the easy way. They want to get rich quick. They want to drop the 50 pounds without going to the gym. Like whatever it is, and the truth is yeah, you can get lucky, but I mean, I don't want to over ism this conversation, but
oh, you're
the
good.
harder you work, the luckier you get, right? Like it's one of those things that it is an effort first conversation, and that's what creates momentum, and momentum creates results.
And it's like, a lot of people are like, oh, Chris, you're so lucky. I'm like, well, Chris works like 5 jobs. And
Lucky
two
with
of
an abundance of opportunity.
yeah, and 2 of them I don't even get paid for.
Yeah.
So, it's not necessarily, I don't do it for the pay. 2 of my jobs I don't get paid for. It's not a job.
Mhm.
They're passions. I do them because I would pay someone. And technically, if you look at it, because I don't get paid to do it, I literally pay to do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I literally pay to do the other thing.
Yeah, but here's what's cool. What's cool is that the 3 other opportunities create the margin for you to be generous in that way, right? And that's another thing that I find really interesting in our culture is a lot of us, we want to be generous. A lot of us struggle with the capacity to be generous because we're not doing the work that we need to do in order to have the resources to be generous the way we want to be generous. And so for you want to do this, right? And so I think it's fantastic for you. I mean, there's the work-life balance conversations and all those, so I'm not going to give you a total pass. But at the same time, I think it's fantastic for you that if 3 equip you to do the 2 that you want to be generous with your time and your resources to do, I chart that up as a win. Like that's a W.
Yeah. And, and sometimes whenever things get rough, what I sometimes do? I go look at my goal chart and I'll be like, oh, okay, well, I got to work extra hard if I ever want to be, in that spot. And it's funny because I'm about to retire from the military, so I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up.
That's a question I ask a lot of people, Chris. I've asked a lot of very, very successful individuals, what do you want to be when they grow up? And most of them cannot answer that question. So if you figure that out, you'll save us all from our own insanity.
I'm going to write a book. I'm
Yeah.
going to write a book, and it's going to be called When I Grow Up.
Yeah, when I grow up. Yeah. Yeah, no, man. I mean, multi-millionaires that I've had the honor of having some one-on-one time have looked at me and said, I don't know. When I've said, so what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, that's that, and you're right. It's like, what do you want to be? Well, look at it. We're very blessed. First off, if you're listening from America right now, you just won the lottery.
Yeah.
You have so many opportunities in this land. So many. And really, your opportunities are limited by the person that looks at you in the mirror.
Yeah. 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 It's really true.
Every day, my normal routine, I wake up at 5 o'clock and then I go for a walk. And I'm battling, physical ailments as well. Like I have vertigo all the darn time. It's amazing, trying to walk in the dark with vertigo with car coming at you, and you're like, I
headlights.
know
Yeah.
I'm having an attack, but I'm just gonna keep going.
Yeah.
You know? And then I'm the cool dude that's always inside with sunglasses now because I have light sensitivity too. So it's like, man, I'm just getting double whammy. But guess what?
Mhm.
I don't quit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those words are, they really resolve with me after 20, when I graduated from college with a college degree in my hand. And the other part of that story is that the company I was working for at the time in technology was a nonprofit. And they were having some funding and grant conversations, which were not conducive to my salary. So I have this shiny real estate license. It's a happy accident, right? And then 5 years later, you've got 2008, and then you get to March of 2020 in a pandemic. So there's many times that I've had these moments where the man in the mirror is going, "Are you crazy? Like, shouldn't you be doing something else?" Like, all those kinds of things. And the truth is it took way too long, but I've really come to a piece of um I'm doing exactly what I want to, should be, and was built to do. And the only secret to success, because sometimes when I'm in an industry conversation, people want to ask that question, is those words, is a million times I wanted to quit, but I've never quit. And I even had to reposition my perspective on that. Like, quitting became the equivalency in my mind of failure. And failure was something that I didn't want to accept. But there's a difference in the not quitting idea between failure and giving yourself the grace and the space and the time to reposition, to take a break, to change your business model, to realign with what you're really trying to do. And so there's been a few things that I've done in my career that have cost me an absolute fortune. And so you can frame that as failure or whatever you want to frame it as. For me, I've framed some of those really expensive mistakes as, I would rather have taken the shot and seen what would happen than live with the question of what could have been. And so all of those circumstances and all the time that I've been doing this leads me to, like I said, a greater clarity of, I'm just not going to quit. That's the secret to success, is not quitting. But I'm also going to take all of these things that I've learned along the way and have greater clarity as to what I am going to do and what I'm not going to do. Right. Every yes is a no to something else, and every no leaves me the margin of a yes to something that may align with what I want.
And every time a door closes, another door opens up.
Exactly.
And the whole entire when people are like, "Oh man, you took a knee and you took a breather," why'd you quit? No, I didn't quit. I realigned myself. Like you were saying, like sometimes you have to realize that you may wake up one day, and if you feel overwhelmed, it's probably your body telling you need to take a break.
Yeah.
Because you did not allow yourself to take that break.
Right. What you think is going to happen and what happens, two different things. What looks like I've had different models and strategies in business that looked fantastic on paper, looked fantastic on social media, but they didn't necessarily accomplish my goals. And so, in those moments, you gotta find the truth, and you gotta take that knowledge and apply it to what is it that you really want? What are you really trying to accomplish? A lot of people tell me all the time. I interview a lot of people because we're almost always hired. A lot of people tell me I'm not money motivated. And that's fine. It's great to not be money motivated. But that doesn't mean that there's not a goal or something that is going to fulfill that. And so what they're doing in their job, where they're spending their time, that's got to have some cohesion and some alignment to where they do find their satisfaction. And so, for some people, Money might be the scorekeeper, might be the feedback as to if they're working or not. For other people, it might be, something entirely different, and the number of people served, or the results that it creates, or just how it makes other people feel. And having the clarity as to what you're actually trying to accomplish is huge. And it's even huge in leadership to understand with your team, what are they trying to accomplish? Because that goes into a whole different topic of retention and all kinds of things where, people leave leaders because their goals aren't being met. They're not actually necessarily looking for something other. They're not accomplishing what they want to accomplish.
So, and a lot of people will tell you, hey, I'm not money motivated, but when it comes down to it, how are you going to put food on your table?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
The money's a necessity. It's
yeah,
no matter how you frame it in your mind, it's a necessity. So
unfortunately, it is a necessity, and we don't realize it till later on in life. And that's why one of my things is I always tell people, invest when you're young. Invest when you're young, because eventually you're not gonna be able to chase that stick, or you're not gonna be able to chase that carrot all the time. Eventually you want to get to a point where you don't have to chase the carrot or get hit by the stick. Eventually you want to be able to remove the carrot and the stick, and then actually fulfill your goals and live your passion. And if you're constantly chasing a carrot or getting a stick, you're not gonna be able to do that. So I get where they're saying, hey, I'm not money motivated, but I think the correct statement is, hey, I want to get to a point where money is not the problem, not the point. And I could tell you, like, I drive for Lyft every once in a while. I don't do it to drive for Lyft. I don't drive for Lyft. I have people come in my car, and then I have great conversations with people. It allows me to get out of my comfort zone and talk with people. I hear all sorts of stories, which are awesome. I love talking to people. That's like one of my passions. And when knowing that, hey, like, I don't need this for the money, I'm free. I'm free to do how I want to do it. They come into my car, they listen to country music. I don't care. It's my car. They don't want to be in there. They could end the ride and then go get another Lyft.
Uber wrap.
Yeah. Or like, hey, whenever they come in my car, I'm going to ask them how they're doing and actually genuinely listen to them, and genuinely like have comments and try to make a conversation that's tailored to them, because I want them to feel like they're welcome, because that's how I run my operation. Now, they don't like it, okay, whatever. Sometimes I get those guys, they just don't crack, and then I just turn the radio up. I'm like, all right, country it is. And then we just go on our very whole day. But it's funny because I never thought that doing some job like that would ever fulfill me in any way. But I realized, doing it, that having this interaction with people and actually getting to know them in the 5 minutes has really helped me with my elevator talk. You want to get really good at your elevator talk? Drive for Lyft.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I've hired people out of Lyft. But yeah. It's we have a very recent example. And before I get into that too much, what's interesting when we talked about those seasons a minute ago is it feels like we have a very short memory in our culture, where we get very short-sighted. And there's other cultures that if you just spend a minute looking at them, like, they think in hundreds and 500-year increments, and in America we don't. And it's a big miss. And so not only those wise tales of you're either going into a season or or going into a storm or coming out of them and all those kinds of things, but my gosh, in 2023, in the recent rearview mirror, we have a ever-present example of what inflation really looks like. And so like we'll pick on something unrelated. Like, you look at cars. Cars were crazy expensive in 2020, and in 2023 cars are crazier more expensive. We actually went through a time where people's cars were, they said they were appreciating, but they weren't appreciating. It was that their currency was devaluating, right? And so, it's one of those things where when you talk about investment and you talk about that, my real estate practice is in Seattle and Boise. And in Seattle, there's this place that I used to really kind of love as a college kid, and it's called Green Lake. And there's these homes that are historic homes around Green Lake. And being a real estate guy and a nerd and somebody that's been in it a while, I've researched some of those homes around Green Lake, because back in my younger days, when living in Seattle was something that I was interested in. I always thought, like, oh, how great would it be to have one of these historic homes overlooking the park and the lake and all that kind of stuff. And, you look at some of the old deeds on those properties, and some of those properties have been owned by families, back to the 40s and the 50s. And, they paid like 30 and 40 and 50K for that kind of stuff. And, back then that was a lot of money. Their wages were probably dollars, like single digits. And so, those homes were expensive then. And by today's standard, we think, oh my gosh, that's a 7-figure property. And that family, they paid 50K for it. And, we have a recent example of a lot of our commodities that cost a lot less 24 months ago. And they cost a lot more. So sometimes investing is just being prepared that things are going to get more expensive. I'm in housing. I talk to people about housing all the time, and they say, well, interest rates are high and houses are expensive and all that stuff. And, so is renting. But there's a season to rent. So, if we live in the truth and we make plans and we think about the future, that's how we're going to create success. It's done over time. It's not a magic thing. It doesn't just happen. And you can even take the statistics on pro athletes and lottery winners. They usually don't retain their wealth, because when you didn't earn it in the first place, you steward it differently than when you've actually earned it.
And I love how you ended on that. I'm like, wow, that you just came out of like right field and you just like slammed it, because you're right. People who do not work for something, and it's not necessarily pro athletes or lottery winners. Just think about it like this: like, have you ever given a kid an item that is very expensive, and you're like, man, I never had one of these when I was a kid, and then that kid just destroys it.
Yeah.
Utterly destroys it.
Dude, he's 11 now, but when my kid turned 3, I was so excited to buy him a Lego train. And I mean, this thing was like $250, and I bought a 3-year-old a Lego train, and that thing got disseminated in, not very much time, and it's exactly what you're talking about. Like, a 3-year-old doesn't have the capacity to understand that his dad never had, Legos that cost over $100. And, I was just an excited dad that wanted to bless my kid.
Yeah.
And it was a big lesson.
Yeah. And that blessing, you like, oh man, my kid's going to really like this. Yeah. He played with it. He messed with it. Yeah. He may have learned some things from it, but in the long run, that train got destroyed. It's just like, hey, those people that win the lottery, they learned a very valuable lesson, that their money doesn't last, and that everybody out of the woodworks is going to come and try to hang on your coattails off of your success or your winnings. Well, not necessarily success, because success with sports, yes, because you worked for it. And if you listen to my show, guys, I have NFL players on my show talking about this stuff. And they talk about it all the time. They're like, hey, yeah, like one day they come out and they say, hey, we need to cut the team from 80 to 50. And you got people rolling out in brand new Escalades with no job. And that happens. And, when you talk about cars being so expensive, bro, I sold a Corolla for like maybe 10 grand when I moved to Japan, 2021. 2022 into 2022, I'm trying to buy, and I'm looking at the same darn Corolla, 17 grand. I'm like, what the
Right, right,
I'm like, what just
right,
happened?
right,
And inflation rate, I think they're like 7.1,
yeah,
7.1%.
yeah,
Holy moly. That
yeah,
means that every 12 years, that $1 is decreased by 50 cents.
mhm.
You know what I'm saying? Like that's insanity.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And yet there's, you know, you know, I'm not gonna quote it right, but the wonders of the world are things like compounding interest and leveraging different assets in the right way. And sadly, like those are the things that we have to do in order to position ourselves in a way where, like you said, you can take care of yourself and you can be generous and help other people. I mean, like I said, like I find it so interesting. Like there, there's not that many bitter souls that don't want to help other people. There is way more people that want to be helpful. And I think the biggest frustration in life is when you don't have the capacity to help and you want to. And
Yeah.
so, you don't, going back to that money motivation, like don't be motivated by the money. That's fine. Be motivated by the capacity to be helpful.
Yeah. I I tell everybody like, hey, you know what my end goal is? Here's my end goal. It's pretty simple. I want to create generational wealth.
Mhm.
Not for me, not for my kids, for my kids' kids. I want them to be generational, like generational wealth is not necessarily money in their pockets. It's a family that sticks together. It's we actually sit down and talk and help each other out. It's that whole entire, hey, you help your grandmother out.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, hey, when you're over at your grandma's house, you should go check the garbage can and go take it out to the street without her asking, and teaching our kids to do stuff like that. It's that kind of generational wealth. And yeah, it may end up looking like a monetary wealth, but it's weeding out the quitting. It's
Yeah,
weeding out the laziness. And
yep,
there's nothing wrong with having times where you sit down, sometimes you need to tune your brain out. You have to turn it off.
yeah, yeah.
You have to sit in the quiet. You need
It,
to.
it's yeah. I mean, it's we make it so complicated. Our bodies require sleep.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the lesson? Well, there's time for rest, right? Like there's 4 seasons in a year. Things change. There's a growing season and there's a stagnant season, right? Like there's all these things that if we would just slow down, maybe put down the phone and turn off the news and like look at it and just be pretty pragmatic. It's like you kind of have a lot of the answers right in front of us. But we want to be intellectual and enlightened and, make things complicated and, feel special in our sophistication and we blow things out of proportion. And sometimes we chase the wrong things. And I'm not saying, I'm coming from the voice of, I've made those mistakes. But I've also come to the place where it's like, you just start to realize like, you got to create some balance. You got to, you got to be clear on what's actually important. What's actually important is those relationships you talked about with your family. What's actually important is helping others, family or not. Those kinds of things. Those are the things that move the needle.
Yeah. And creating that tribe, like whenever you start out, you know, everybody that starts out in a career field or that's kind of like where you're getting pushed out of the nest, right?
Yeah.
Because that's also a very important time
Mhm.
when we do start kind of getting on our own, when we start having to build our own tribe. Yeah, we still have our family support system, but just because your family, I'm going to pick on electricians, sorry, Kurt, but just because your family has a bunch of electricians in there doesn't mean necessarily you need to become an electrician,
Mhm.
and they're going to support you in whatever you're going to do. like the electricians, it doesn't mean that you're going to be an electrician. So like you need to find someone else that's doing what you want to do, or what you have like, even like, let's say I want to be an engineer. So I probably should go find some engineers and actually go see what they're doing.
Mhm.
Because how am I going to be something if I never even went to go check it out? I'm not going to be happy in it when I realize, man, I spent a lot of time and I don't even want to be this,
Yeah, nobody succeeds alone. And then number two, what that means is that you probably, when you set out to do something, you probably have a mentor. Maybe that mentor was an assigned person at your workplace, or whatever it was, but somebody said, hey, let me show you, right? And so that just comes back to the law of reciprocity. Like, somebody helped me exponentially grow my career. um Happened at a unique time. It happened after that 2008 disaster, right? So when I said I got to figure it out, I didn't have all the answers in the beginning to figure it out. By God's grace, I ended up with a relationship with somebody that was tremendously influential in a repositioning, because I'd resolved not to quit, right? So we made a lot of changes and making those changes. And now today, I was on the phone with somebody who they were trying to make a jump from one industry to ours. They're having a hard time making that jump, and we just boiled it down in a conversation, call it a coaching call today, where I just made it very simple for it. And I said, you have one job when you put on your real estate industry hat, and that is to be a connector. And we talked about what that meant, and we hung up the phone, and everything I told her was something that candidly I learned from somebody else. It's not my brilliance. It's not my intellect. I'm not that special. My mom thinks I'm special, but I'm not that special, right? And so those are things that a mentor bequeathed to me, and my job is to give it away to somebody else and to help them.
See, and like there's coaches, there's mentors, and there's teachers, and they all three are different roles. And sometimes you could have one person that's going to coach you and provide mentorship for you, but they are different roles. So I argue not just finding a good mentor, but also finding a good coach and finding good teachers, because necessarily the mentor may not be somebody that's in your field. And you can have multiple mentors. You could have somebody that's like, hey, I need some mentorship. I want to be this. And they're like, okay, well, hey, I want to be an architect, right? But I go to you, Joe, and I'm like, Joe, I want to be an architect. Well, you're providing mentorship to me.
Right.
And you're like, hey, well, you need to find somebody in the field, and I get hired, and they're gonna be like, hey, well, you need to learn this technique. So then I find a teacher,
Right,
who ends up coaching me. But also someone else is like, hey, I noticed you have some really good potential in this field. Let me kind of, hey, why don't you take this course? And they start coaching you. I mean, like, hey, they start building up your skill sets and stuff like that. So and the teacher is teaching you little tiny things at a time. But that mentor, Joe, you're guiding me, and not necessarily just one mentor at a time. Having multiple mentors and making sure that your mentors know, hey, hey, I've been talking with Pastor Jeff, or I've been talking with Gary Norquist. Like I've been talking to all these different people, and just because they're they may not be necessarily an architect or something like that, doesn't
there's so much that there's so much that crosses over. I was in a conversation one day with a business owner of a medical services company, and they were whining, and that's okay. We all whine sometimes. And they were telling me about their problems, and I was just like, well, now wait a minute. So how does your staff work? And they told me, and like, well, how do you advertise? And they told me, and I said, well, how do you get new patients? Or in my world, client, and they told me. And one of the things I realized, Chris, is in the conversation was we had nearly the exact same business model. And so I was able to say, well, you won't believe this, but the way that we help people, build their wealth through real estate is very similar to how you help people be as healthy as they can be. And I ended up, accidentally being able to mentor them through a growth phase of their business that was causing some pain, to say, hey, this is how I did it. And like, I mean, nearly the way they compensated their staff and all that stuff, like there were so many similarities. And so sometimes you just discover in those relationships with others that there might be a lot more cross-pollination than people think. And just because it's a difference in industry or whatever, like it doesn't mean anything. Gary's a contractor, he's a home builder, right? And Pastor Jeff is I mean, he's his own thing, right? Because he's a pastor and a race car driver and a construction genius and all those kinds of things. So it's one of those things where you don't always just put it into one box. I find my friends that are in restaurant businesses, like we've got a lot in common in our business structures there too. So there's things that you can kind of extract and apply, and it makes sense.
And I tell a lot of people, because I'm very fortunate where I get the opportunity to coach, mentor, guide, train. You know what I'm saying? Like I have an opportunity where I do it all the time. All the time. It's on a daily average, including the weekends, we'll say probably about 4 or 5 people a day. Some days it's a lot more. But that is my entire purpose, is to mentor people all day long. And believe it or not, me mentoring, coaching, training gets the mission done. And I find myself, I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
I really love doing it. And that's going to be the one hardest thing for me to let go of when I leave the military, is that I don't have that as big of an opportunity on that one-on-one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And hey, what am I doing? This.
Yeah. And you'll find it in another format. And last but not least is there is that saying that if you want to master something, you teach it. And that's a really interesting thing too, because for me it's definitely from an industry perspective, but it's like it challenges your thoughts, your strategy, how you execute or don't on those kinds of things when you go to try to tell somebody else how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I teach leadership, I teach mentorship, I teach all that stuff all the time. Like I've gone to, I've been to master leadership courses, I've been to all these different things, and then I started teaching it a while back, and learning that, talking about it, being involved with it, putting thought into it, that's how I mastered my craft. And that's how no matter what kind of craft you're in, that's how you master that craft. It's, for example, like this podcast, hey, it's probably not the best podcast out there. I know guys, despite popular belief, probably not the most popular one out there. But how do I get better at doing it? Repetitions. Get stronger with repetitions.
Mm-hmm.
Just like with everything else. Your first deal, I bet you if you look back at yourself, if you were able to replay, unlike you, I could replay my first episode.
Yeah.
Like if you could replay your first deal in real estate, you'd probably be like, how'd you even pull that off, man?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, my first client's a gracious man, and he's been a client for years and years to follow. But I mean, I even think about my naivety prior to the 2008 crash. And there was a lot of difference of opinion and speculation. And, you know, and even in the Western Washington market with the strong job market and stuff, there was even a time where, you know, it's kind of the opinion was like everywhere but here, you know, and so I do absolutely, I still replay by memory, you know, things that I said and advice and counsel that I gave, that my heart was right, my intentions were right, but I didn't have the experience, I didn't have the reps. And you know, the number one thing, like using that analogy of reps, like in the gym, like when you don't know what you're doing, you're at the greatest risk of hurting yourself, right? And so, you know, that there was some pain that, you know, I led some people to, not because I intended to, but because it just didn't have the experience. And so, you know, as you do things over and over, like you build the podcast, right? Like you learn things, you refine things, you get better, and there is no substitute for experience. I mean, there isn't, right? So we're back to that investment over time. You there's no shortcuts. Building wealth, having expertise, you know, being a leader, whatever it is, like there are no shortcuts. The only difference between me and you is going to be time on the court, depending on what we're talking about, right? So you take, you know, again, you take sports people, right? We take Tiger Woods. Like Tiger Woods, he hits a ball with a golf club more than both of us combined with an Xbox. That's why he's Tiger, right? You take Jordan. Jordan talked about how many free throws he missed, right? But he put the time on the court to make them, right? Russell Wilson, first to show up, last to leave. I know everybody's pissed at him right now, but you know, I mean, what he did for the Hawks was notable, remarkable. Like it doesn't change what he accomplished in his time there, right? And so when you take all that into account, you know, the perspective that we got to have is, you know, that you gotta put in the time, you know, like it sometimes people take it in this resentful posture when you say, well, you gotta earn it. Well, you gotta earn it. There's no shortcuts.
Yeah.
The shortcut is doing it daily.
So it's funny, you just cued a memory. Every time that one of my sailors advanced to the next pay grade, I always made sure I went and bought their next rank insignia. I'm not sure if you know what a rank insignia is,
Yeah.
but you know, it's what we wear on our collar devices, our uniform, and the cloth one, I'd always write, earn it every day. Earn it every day.
Yep.
It's not something that it's not something that you should take for granted. You should earn it every day. You should show up and you should do it. And you know, sometimes whenever I'm doing something, I'm looking at myself, I'm like, am I crazy? Am I crazy? You know, I look around, I'm like, hey, am I crazy? They're all like, no, man, like I thought you knew what you're doing. I'm like, no, I feel like I'm crazy sometimes. And sometimes you're doing something, you're like, man,
Right.
I'm looking at myself in the mirror. I'm like, am I crazy for doing this? Because that means I'm uncomfortable doing something, which means I'm doing something that I would have never thought I would ever push myself to if I don't say, hey, am I crazy? Am I crazy to have a goal with vertigo to end up walking every single day? Like my goal, you want to know what my goal is? Every day walk a half a marathon.
Yeah.
I have vertigo. Like my doctor looks at me like, you're crazy. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I'm still going to do it. Like that's my goal, is to end up walking so much that I get to, my body is able to do 14 miles a day. Like I talked to my doctor today and he's like, hey, your feet, we're going to get you some insoles. He's like, hey, you know, find that support team, find that team that's going to get you to where you need to go. I'm not there yet. You know, one day I hope to be as cool as people like David Goggins and Cameron Haynes at doing that. But like
duct tape you together like old Goggins.
that guy had his legs cut in half now.
He's a beast. I got to go to an event where he was speaking and it was just wild. So
and he'll be like, oh yeah, hey, if you told him, hey, I want to, you tell him, yeah, I want to run a half a marathon, he'd be like, why aren't you doing a full marathon?
Yeah, or two. Yeah.
It's like, he would straight up look at you, and part of my French, he'd be like, "Why are you being such a pussy?"
Right. Hey, that's his church talk right there. I mean, yeah. Old Goggins, he's got some adjectives, man. But yeah,
And that's like, and he's right. Don't Lightfoot around it. If that's what you want to do, go do it. Don't let your brain, your head, it's in my head, figuratively and literally,
right.
but don't let yourself box yourself into something that you think that, oh well, I'm like this, so I can't do it. Yeah, hey, it's going to be painful, it's going to hurt, you're going to question your sanity sometimes, but if you want to achieve something, you got to get uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. It brings so many things to mind. So what's ironic is you can't see it, but right above this monitor and camera that I'm looking at right now, looking at you, is a sign that says success is never owned, it's rented, and the rent is due every day. And then hanging off my lampshade is a big old set of clown glasses, and it's from my friend Ronnie Doss. You might know Ronnie. And Ronnie talks about lenses. And he uses those glasses on stage, makes himself look like a clown. And and he talks about, like, the way that you look at things is your perception, right? So in your example, you have a medical professional, they're trained, they're in their craft, they know what they're talking about, and they're saying, hey man, like here's a limitation. And they got lenses on that make the world blue, and you've got lenses on that make the world green, and you're saying, all right, I acknowledge the limitation, and I'm going to interpret what it means. What does having vertigo mean? As well, it means that I'm going to do a half marathon every day, right? And so, whether it's the good things or the bad things that happen in our life, the difference is in our reaction, right? So if we win the lottery and our reaction is to, be extravagant and careless, that's what it means. If our reaction is, I'm going to take, every bit of this, and I'm going to run to my financial advisor, and I'm going to, invest it with him, and he's going to put me on a budget, and I'm going to have a budget, and I'm going to, I'm going to keep the same phone and the same car and the same house. Like, think about Buffett, like, lives in the same house, right? Like he made a choice. The man could make a different lifestyle choice and still be a very wealthy man, right? And so, but his lens is, I'm going to do it this way. He also has a lens. He says, when everybody else is scared, be optimistic. And when everybody else is optimistic, be scared. His words are a little different. It's not a direct quote, but like, those are the things that we take into account, different things. And we say, it's like the 2008 thing. It's like, I could have been a victim of it. I could have said, well, I used to be in the real estate space, and the market crashed, and this happened to me, and this happened, and and I could have a whole group of people that are like, oh yeah, man, that's terrible, and and I could be, selling French fries or something, like that's there, that's possible, that's a lens, that's a choice. And there's the other side of it where, I put on my blue glasses and said, well, it's time to figure it out, right? I mean, Goggins' story is really inspiring, slightly intimidating, but it's inspiring. Like, the odds were against him, and he resolved to beat all odds. And then he went and did it. I recently heard Michael Phelps speak, and he talked about his journey, right? And he talked about that everybody else trained in the pool 6 days. He trained 7. Why? Because he knew that his difference between his competition and them was going to be in training 7. And he said in the interview, he literally said he got to the place where he could feel the difference in water. Okay. Well, if you want to compete against Phelps and you want to win more gold medals than any person's ever, that was his goal, was to, be the most decorated Olympian, right? Like, you got to get to this place where you can feel the difference in water. Like, I feel the difference between hot water and cold water, but I can't get in a I can't get in a pool and tell you, like, oh well, this has got a different feeling to my skin, right? And so it's this whole nother level. And so it just comes down to what are we gonna resolve to do, and who are we gonna be, and what are the stories that people are gonna tell when we're gone. And that's, like you talked about generational wealth. And I mean, dude, that's it. What are the stories we're gonna talk about Chris when Chris is gone? We're gonna say, well, he's this crazy guy, maybe, did 5 things when he should have done 3 or whatever, but he led with passion and he did this. And it was really a awkward time for him when he pivoted from the Navy, because he needed to figure out where he was gonna, follow his passion of leading people and pouring into them. And so, those are the things that quantify to life and fulfillment and satisfaction, that kind of stuff. That's why, when you look at the ultra rich, it comes to a point they don't really care about the money. Like, yeah, they protect it, they steward it, but it doesn't drive them either, because it just, what's a problem for most, where that's something they got to steward, it's just not really a problem for them anymore. They still steward it, but it's not, they're not worried about making their mortgage payment or whatever. So it's interesting what we focus on, and even sometimes what media wants us to focus on, and what we should focus on.
I like how you said that, what media, and this is a source of media, but it's funny. I don't listen to CNN. I don't listen to Fox News. I don't listen to, I get little snippets, but I turn off all those outside forces.
Probably wisdom.
I turn them all off. And some people are like, oh, did you hear about this? I'm like, no. You know why? Because I have my circle. And if I want to affect bigger change, I fix what I can fix in my circle.
My most life impacting mentor, Chris, is a man named Ben. And he's literally made like stickers and paraphernalia that says this: leaders focus on what they can control. So you and I, we got no control over the US economy, the US government, but Congress, Senate, right? The executive branch, like, we just don't control that. I mean, my gosh, you work for the Navy, right? Like, I know you don't have control over the Navy. I mean, I don't even know if, the leaders of the Navy are in control of the Navy, right? Like, those kinds of things. And so, yeah, a lot of energy, a lot of can be invested in those things, and they don't really do anything. So yeah, credit to my friend Ben. Leaders focus on what they can control.
And it's funny because you mentioned you mentioned like, hey, we can't really control like the government, we can't control other people and how they save, but what we can do is shed light into how we became successful, on how we think in a certain way. Therefore, once we start, some people say fake it till you make it. No, it's think it till you make it, because there's power in thought. Just like there's power in prayer, there's power. Thought and prayer is the same thing.
Yeah.
You put thought towards it, and you put words towards it. You start writing towards it. You start talking to your creator. I talk to God all the time. I just have conversations with the dude. No, I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Putting thought towards it. And it's funny because this book that was written over 100 years ago, The Richest Man in Babylon.
Yep. Good story.
Very, very good book. It's very old. Still holds true to today.
Yeah. There is nothing new under the sun, right? And that's what's interesting, is like, we want to pretend that we're figuring something out. And that's why, we're back to that common sense conversation. It's like, well, a lot of it is figured out. So you make the plan, you work the plan, you do the plan. When you follow the plan works. And those are the things that give us our center and our greatest truths.
Oh yeah, man. I think me and you could probably go on and on and on and on
For a few minutes.
For many minutes, and it's also because we haven't caught up in a while. I would like to probably have you come back on sometime. That'd be awesome. But I think I'm going to lead off into our questions, our final questions
Sure.
here. You know, I I'm really excited because you're one of the industry leaders in your industry in Washington State. You guys are constantly helping people out, and not just like, hey, I'm hoarding it for myself, but you're always looking for outside investors and stuff like that. So I kind of want to do a little selfish plug or selfless
Yeah.
plug for Joe. Joe is always out there uh, uh, with the real estate stuff. So like if you're interested in investing in real estate, make sure you hit Joe
Thank
up.
you.
And you know, Joe put some really good wisdom out there, you know, talking about focusing on your people, mentorship, and don't give up, the don't quit mentality. That is super important. So I appreciate you coming on here and talking about that. I do have some parting questions for you.
Sure.
So I'll start off with the first one. If you had a time machine and you were to go back in time and you were to say, hey, Joe, this is what you need to do to become financially independent. What would you bestow yourself?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so Chris, I always try to give disclaimers when I get too deep in opinion or my own Kool-Aid. And so I'll give that quick disclaimer that my passion in real estate's really deep, and my justification for it is you know, if you're listening to this and in close proximity of when we recorded it, you know, let's talk about your 401k, let's talk about your stock holding, let's talk about your crypto account. And yeah, real estate does ebb and flow in value, but it retains value, and it's proven over the time in history to be very good investment. And so if I had a time machine, you know, I was thinking about this earlier. When I was in that thing where the buddy was trying to get me started, him and I spent a little bit of time where I was looking at some real estate with the idea. I was a college student with the idea of I might buy this house and I'm going to have a bedroom and I'm going to rent out these other bedrooms. And I never quite pulled the trigger on and never quite figured it out. And so in modern day language, there's a big influence. If you like real estate investing, it's called bigger pockets. And in bigger pockets, they talk about something called house hacking. We didn't use that language back in 2003, but that's what I was flirting with. And so what would have been amazing for my foundation, and if I had a time machine, is that I would have resolved to figure out how to work through that. And so I didn't figure that out. That's a time I guess I could say I quit. Like I didn't quite line up, and so I ended up paying rent for a substantially more amount of time. Whereas had I figured out how to make that leap, I could have been set up for having roommates that were paying me rent and paying my mortgage. And you know, God's been good. But you kind of sit there and go, man, I got so close to that, but I never quite did it. So if you are young or in the beginning stages, I'd say think creatively about how you could get into real estate, and don't be afraid to consider partnership. Partnership is something that our culture also frowns on, but can be powerful.
You know, there's definitely power in numbers. You know, partnership, if you go into a blind partnership, then you're foolish. Now, if you go into a partnership with all cards laid out on the table, because when you're a partner, you got to share all your cards. You can't hold any aces in the pocket. You got to actually say, hey, bro, I want to do this. And here's all my credit, here's all my debt. They should reciprocate the same manner. And if you see any twinge and doubt of passion, it's probably not right.
Yeah.
You got to find the right partner.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's somebody that, you know, they're gonna house hack with you or something too. Like vested is an adjective that has a lot of different definitions. So Not all partnerships are right. Yeah, I agree with Chris. Don't be reckless about it, but also don't be afraid to figure it out. I mean, this is how I look at it. I look at it with my team member. I'm starting to have the conversation with people that are a part of my world as to what would it look like if we invested in a piece of real estate together, such that I would get to my goals faster and they'd get to their goals faster too.
Yeah.
Right. But
Yeah.
we've laid down some history with each other. These are people that I know. They're not strangers. They're not willy-nilly.
Yeah. And that's powerful, man. That is straight up great advice. Bigger Pockets, if you guys haven't heard, is another network of podcasts. And they have books, they have blogs, they are they are a conglomerate of
All things. Yeah.
all things. And these guys, they had a Bigger Pockets here in San Diego that had an actual convention. So it's a great way to figure out how to house hack. Definitely, that's such a great advice. Why make someone else rich?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's times I talk people into it, Chris, as a real estate professional. Uh, life is lived in seasons. We've talked about that in this time together. There is a season where it probably makes sense to rent. And there is also a season where you might be operating from fear. And because of the fear of the unknown, you're not taking action. And now we apply inflation and appreciation, and we say, gosh, I wish I could have bought that house in Green Lake for 50,000, right? Like, I mean, it's like again, these truths, they're there and they're universal. And so, I've heard it said this way, and then we'll move on to your next question. But, very rarely are you driving around with your dad or your grandpa or, a mentor or somebody, and them saying, yeah, I could have bought that, and I'm sure glad I didn't. When you, I mean, most of the time it's, oh man, I almost bought that house, or I regret selling it, or, that building was for sale back when it was cheap, and blah, 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 So the story that you normally hear is the regret of not taking action versus I regretted taking the action. And then, like I said, for me, I had to kind of come to the place where I just accepted, like, sometimes if it doesn't work out, I just would rather say, hey, I'm glad I tried versus never trying.
Yeah. And unless it's a timeshare, you'll regret that.
Yeah. We do not endorse timeshare. So
Oh my gosh.
That's another company I own that is the answer to the timeshare.
Oh my goodness.
That's a separate conversation.
Oh, I made that mistake once.
Yeah.
There you
Well,
go. My secret's out. Actually, my first episode, I think I'd tell everybody.
if you haven't bought a timeshare, one of your relatives have. So that's just the way that works.
I'm the relative, hopefully the only one. So my second question, the last question is, what book or podcast or both do you think people should digest?
Oh boy, I mean, it kind of depends on where you're at and where you're coming from. You know, if you're a spiritually minded, kingdom minded kind of person, my favorite book is called Pearls of the King. If you are somebody in business and you kind of have a what's next kind of perspective, if things like the adjective retirement are coming to mind, there's a great book called Why Making Money is Killing Your Business. And tempted to just kind of peek at my Audible library real quick. Just kind of, there's a book I'm not quite remembering the title of.
Oh, it's okay. Take your time, man.
Yeah.
And I think you already mentioned your podcast, Bigger Pockets.
Well, yeah, that's one of them. Yeah, I mean, I listen to a lot of them. I really like stuff by Simon Sinek. There's kind of some leadership and personal development stuff there. Go Giver is another really great one, to just kind of have that perspective of being generous with your time and that kind of stuff. the captain class. I think you might even enjoy that, Chris. The captain class, is a leadership perspective kind of one that's a really um, good one to just kind of like if your goal is to be able to lead well. That's a really good one, and like I said, I think you'll have some personal connection and alignment to it.
Yeah. Nice. Man. Well, wow, you just laid out a whole load of books.
Yeah, it just gave you a book list.
And
Yeah.
and if you're not like, and I know I personally add all the books that everybody tells me about into my Audible. So I actually listen to a lot of well, not Audible. I use this app. It's called Libby. I'm not sure if
Oh,
you've
okay.
heard of it. So if you, I tell, here's a little reading hack that you can read for free. Go to your local library, get a library card, download the Libby app, upload your library card into it, instant free books. You don't need Audible. Yeah, you're gonna have to wait. It's like a library. You're gonna have to wait for the books to open up. But if you're not getting free credits because you have like a credit card that does, pays for your subscription or something like that, Audible can add up pretty quickly. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, man. Hey, Joe, thanks. This
thank
is
you.
perfect. I love doing this, man. Anybody else that wants to come on, send them on my way, man. I love this kind of stuff, and it's awesome to find somebody else that has a passion just as equal to helping other people, because that's what this is all about, is helping other people.
Hey, even the morticians in the people business, bud.
Hey, I wanted to plug you guys on a new podcast that's coming out. It's called Return to Roots. It's retention, transition, and reintegration from military to veterans in the community. It's a resource podcast that's meant to provide actionable content to help military, active duty, and veterans transition, reintegrate, and also do well in their military career. It's important to have a plan for your transition and never too early to start. One thing that I always hear from everybody that's transitioned out: start now. I hope you enjoy. Take care. ChartYourFi is not an affiliate of the United States Navy, and the views expressed are those of the individual and are not those of the United States Navy and or the Department of Defense. All material on ChartYourFi has been presented information as educational purposes only. The views expressed and all content of the ChartYourFi are generalized and may not be appropriate for all investors.